So what is your personal belief when it comes to the resurrection? What do you think happened? Do you have a belief, or do you just try to interpret the text and try to see what is the message?
Well, I think, so as a historian, I do think it is a historical question. You have a guy who objectively lived, he objectively died, and then individuals close to his inner circle claim that they see him not dead.
Right.
Again.
This is a highly unusual activity.
Highly unusual.
Right. So, but it's hard when you're dealing with illiterate populations, you're dealing with thousands of years of time, you're dealing with an oral tradition, and then you have us sitting here talking about it, trying to figure this out. Literally the end.
Yeah.
Last couple days. It's very difficult for anybody who thinks of themselves as an intelligent person who's secular to even entertain the possibility that someone died and come back to life.
And I get that, but we've already talked about the fact that we don't think that the only thing that exists is matter and motion. We as in you and I, right? Like, we believe that there's something else going on in this world that's a little bit crazy.
There's something else.
And that to, I think, exclude that, I think excludes something that you're kind of putting blinders on for. And you do have, I mean, you're right in terms of all of these ancient conventions and the ways that things were spread around. But the Gospels are written in the lifetime of the eyewitnesses. And they're written in this period of time where you have groups of individuals who could have fact-checked those things. So,
how do you fact-check someone coming back from the dead?
Well,
how many people saw his body, right?
Well, Paul says that 400 people saw him all at once.
400 people saw the crucifixion?
No, saw the resurrected Jesus. Yeah, 1 Corinthians 15, Paul says that Jesus appeared to the disciples, and then he appeared to 400 people all at once. I mean, if we read the Gospel of Luke and the Gospel of Luke and Acts, so same author wrote these both documents, he says that Jesus was walking around teaching them for 40 days after he was resurrected from the dead. And so these are written within a time period when you have people who would have seen Jesus' ministry, who were there, say at something like the feeding of the 5,000, who could have been able to verify or debunk some of these things that are being said. Because Jesus wasn't the only messianic figure who arose and claimed to be the Messiah.
Right.
There were a number of individuals both prior to and after Jesus, but they die and the movement dies with them.
Do you think it's possible that he didn't die? And do you think it's possible that they thought he was dead? Because that does happen. There was actually a case very recently where a guy was about to be harvested for organs. They thought he was dead, and this guy started moving again and came back to life.
Yeah, I mean, we know a lot about Roman crucifixion, and we know that, and we know that they did their job well.
Yeah.
And so, in fact, if you look at, say, very skeptical biblical scholars, like non-believing, atheist, agnostic, Christian scholars, they will say if we can know anything about Jesus, like they'll cast a doubt on a lot of the things that we read about in the Gospels in terms of the actual historical Jesus of Nazareth. They'll say one thing we can be sure of is that he died by crucifixion under Pontius Pilate. Because we have not just multiple attested documents that we refer to as the New Testament, but Roman and Greek and Jewish writers refer to that claim afterwards and talk about the fact that you have this guy, and it's mocked within earliest Christianity. So one of our earliest, in fact, not one of, the earliest depiction of Jesus on the cross is called the Alexamenos Graphido. And it's probably from the end of the 1st century, and it's it depicts an individual with their arms raised in an act of worship, worshiping a man with a donkey's head who's being crucified. And right beside it, it says Alexamenos worships his God in Greek. Whoa. And it's mocking, right? Because crucifixion was for the lowest of the low. It was for, like, slaves. In fact, if you were a Roman citizen, you were banned from being crucified. Listen, the Romans were pretty brutal.
Oh, yeah.
But this is why we know, like, it's interesting. We know a lot about crucifixion, but crucifixion was seen as so disgusting. I believe it was Cicero who said that, like, the word crucifixion shouldn't even be on a Roman man's lips. Wow. I mean, the word excruciating, right. X is off of, in Latin, and cruz, off the cross. He probably asphyxiated to death. You kind of drown in your own blood. But the chances of Jesus surviving the crucifixion, I think, are narrow to none. And the chance of him appearing 3 days later completely fine, I mean, if the first thing you do, if you survive a crucifixion and then you go and you find your disciples, the first thing you say is not, peace be with you. It's get me to a hospital, right?
Did they have them back then?
No, not really.
Also, are we entirely certain of their measurement of days?
The thing is, with Jews, any part of a day was considered a day. So 3 days and 3 nights becomes almost an idiom for any part of that day is the day. So if Jesus, and because they count evening to morning is the day, it's very possible that it wasn't like how we would think of 3 24-hour days, especially if he dies on Friday and wakes up on Sunday.
So that would actually make it less time than more time.
Yeah.
So it's not like he had recovery time.
Oh, no, he didn't have recovery time.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm kind of getting. It's not like it was 3 days, it was actually 3 months.
Oh, no.
Then 400 people saw him afterwards. And how many different people have some sort of a recollection or a writing or something that's attributed to them of being witness to his resurrection?
Well, you have Peter, Paul, Jude, James, and Matthew, Mark, and Luke. The thing with Matthew, Mark, and Luke is that Matthew and John are attributed to direct disciples of Jesus. Luke and Mark are not. So they are not eyewitnesses within the Jesus community. In fact, Luke prefaces his gospel by saying that. He's right up front about this. He's like, hey, I'm not an eyewitness. Don't confuse me with an eyewitness. But he actually uses conventional writing. What's the term I'm looking for? He uses writing conventions of the day that would fit within regular biography that was written within the Roman world. So you have a guy named Quintilian who is basically, I mentioned him before, with the he's teaching people how to write, and he says that if you're going to write biography, you need to be interviewing eyewitnesses, and you can't be too far away from the event to be able to write these things. And Quintilian, Lucian, and Josephus, who are all these very prominent ancient biographers and writers of history, have a lot of crossover in the way they describe how you should write history with the words that Luke uses at the beginning of his gospel, where he says, I'm interviewing eyewitnesses and I'm writing up an orderly account. And so he's saying, I'm going to use these methods that are expected as good history of my day. I'm not an eyewitness, so I'm going to try to find the people who are eyewitnesses, and I'm going to try to encapsulate this within a document that communicates what is being written.
So we have an account of the resurrection. Do we have an account of the denial of the resurrection? Is there an historical record of him just dying and this, like a refutal or a rebuttal rather to what they're saying?
No, the only ones from the ancient world that deny his resurrection are groups that come on afterwards that sometimes are described as Gnostics, and they're not necessarily just denying it for the reasons we might think they were. They're denying it because they have incorporated ideas of pagan philosophy where they believe that the spiritual is good and the physical is bad. So if Jesus was crucified, let me back up. If Jesus is God, he cannot have a physical body. So they deny that he actually had a physicality to him. This is sometimes called Docetism. In the ancient world, nobody really had that big of a problem with these kind of supernatural claims. The more of the kind of skepticism was why you would worship a crucified individual to begin with.
Wow. So they were less surprised that he was resurrected.
Or that you would worship a crucified like teacher was just seen as silly.
Because it's so humiliating to be crucified.
Yeah. And that like a God would let himself go through this.
Right.
Like what are you talking about? Right.
Well, there's so many different things that they thought of and believed that weren't true.
Yeah. So this historiographically is, so when we do history, it's an inference to the best explanation. Mm-hmm. And so there are probabilities of things that have happened in history where we can say, okay, there's a higher probability of event A happening and a lower probability of event B happening. So the example I often give is like Jonah being swallowed by the fish. Like, that's low probabilistically, not that it didn't happen, but that, like, as a historian, we gotta, like, say, well, there's no independent cross-reference sources. You don't have multiple attestation for this particular event. The interesting thing about Jesus is that we have more evidence from different writings in the ancient world than we probably should have for someone of his stature. Because we have Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John, these 4 biographies. There's really only one other person in and around that time that can claim to have that much kind of independent testimony of their life, and it's the Roman Emperor Tiberius. So he also has 4 biographers. He has Cassio Dio, Suetonius, Tacitus, and Velleius Paterculus. And so the Roman emperor, who's the most famous, most powerful person at the time, has a similar amount of historiographical evidence biographically for his, the events of his lifetime that Jesus does.
What is the interpretation of Jesus from non-Jesus followers at the time? Like, what did they think he was or who he was?
He was a crucified traveling rabbi. Yeah, I mean, you have individuals like Josephus mentions him, end of 1st century, beginning of the 2nd century. He was a Jewish Roman writer. Tacitus mentions him, who also wrote about the emperor. And you have a number of these individuals, Cassio or Suetonius. But what they're doing mostly is describing what the followers of Christianity are saying about him. Christians are this very unusual group, because they're monotheistic in a world that does not believe in monotheism. And Jews are monotheistic in that time as well, but there was this idea that your religion could be tied to your ethnicity, and that was okay. Like, the Jews believe in one God, and that's weird, but they're Jews. Whereas the Christians start to convert people who are of all different ethnic backgrounds. And so they're like, well, what the heck is going on here? But then the Christians are coming around and they're saying, actually, no, none of those gods exist. If they exist, then they're demons, but they don't actually exist. And this was a big point of persecution within early Christianity. Right before Constantine, you had a guy named Diocletian, who was the emperor, who basically had the goal of wiping out Christianity entirely. And so the worst point of persecution was under the Diocletian rule. Christian literature in particular is being destroyed because they're hunting it out. So Constantine comes after this, and he knows that this is bad for Roman society. And so him and Licinius get together. They're both ruling the Roman Empire at the time. And in 313, they put out this edict of tolerance, which includes Christianity. So it's called the Edict of Milan, and it decriminalizes Christianity, so it's no longer illegal to be a Christian.
What was their motivation?
Constantine converts. And so he becomes friendly to Christians. He also, he commissions books of the Bible to be written as like a peace offering, commissions all of these documents to be brought together and published in one book, Codex Sinaiticus. Codex Sinaiticus is probably one of these documents that Constantine commissioned, because it's one of our earliest examples of a cover-to-cover, Genesis to Revelation copy of the Bible. And it comes from the 4th century, and based on both its dating and based on the fact that this would have been incredibly expensive to make. Like, it took 360 sheep just to put together.
Wow.
Which would have been the equivalent of, like, I don't know, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars today. What do you think of Jesus? Like, in terms of your own, like, journeying and trying to find answers to ultimate questions. What do you think of the historical person of Jesus?